The cuvee is called 19 Hearts, HART. It's not a typo. This block, all the blocks at Renaissance where we farm were planted in succession and basically just named for when they were planted. So there's a slope 1 all the way up into slope 26. Yeah. And this block happens to be slope 19. So that's where the 19 comes from. And our biggest problem when we first came here, it's a 1,300 acre property that at one time had a working fence, but no longer does. And so there were a lot of deer running through the vineyard, and they not only eat the fruit during harvest time, but they also eat the young baby shoots during this time of year. And so it was really just, at first they were eating like 50% of all of our crop. So
it's really frustrating to do all the pruning and tying and then walk through and see that they've just munched every single shoot.
Yeah, nature tax. But we have since built a fence. It was like almost 4,000 linear feet just to wrap around this 7-acre strip. And the slope was planted in the late 70s and early 80s. It was originally a 40-acre slope. It's entirely eastern facing, which is an important part of why it makes the wine that it does. And it was originally planted all to Riesling, and everything at Renaissance is own rooted. So there's no grafted rootstock. There hasn't been phylloxera, knock on wood. And so this whole slope was all basically 40 acres of Riesling. And it made beautiful Riesling, but the organization had a really tough time selling Riesling.
In the 90s?
Late 80s, yeah. Early 90s. And so in 1994, they grafted the entire slope over to Syrah. So every vine has little Riesling shoots coming out with Syrah on top. And a lot of our suckering that would normally be the grafted rootstock is actually just plucking off Riesling shoots. And wherever the Syrah, for whatever reason, dies out, we actually just bring up the Riesling and tie it to the trellising. And for the last couple of years, we've made like 1 barrel of Riesling from this slope. And it's all just interspersed randomly.
Yeah, it's a weird wine to pick because we just kind of pick it whenever we see it, and it's not really a specific thing.
Other general stuff, like I mentioned, it's completely eastern facing. It's the only sort of isolated, completely eastern facing slope at Renaissance. And it's important because we're not just talking about like a gradual eastern. There's a very clear north-south spine that separates this mountain that we're basically on top of right now. And the drop-off is severe. They terraced it because there's basically no other way to drive a tractor or walk up and down it. That's how steep it is. And it's all granite with clay and some other stuff we'll talk about later. But because of that, it catches the first rays of the early morning sun, which is very important for burning off any morning dew, which helps basically make the vineyard mildew free. And then importantly, it warms the vines up early in the morning, but after like 12 or 1 o'clock, the ground, even though the leaves are still receiving sunlight, the ground is no longer receiving direct sunlight because the sun is past that north-south spine of the mountain. So after like 1 o'clock, you're actually starting to get shade on the ground.
And it's cooling, yeah.
Because it's basically a big granite rock that we're on top of, that acts like a radiant heat storage battery all day long. And the western side of this mountain gets that from 1 o'clock to, in the summer, 9 o'clock at night, direct sun. And you can feel it. If you just walk down the road that goes north-south, you'll feel heat on your cheek on the western side and cool on your cheek on the eastern side just as you walk. So it's very drastic, and that as well as the stunning views are the reason that this is our favorite vineyard to work in. And we love it so much that we're actually planting our vineyards, and we live and work and have our cellar just around the corner on the western side of the bottom of this hill. And where our gamay is planted is also eastern facing, sort of to mimic what's going on here with the Syrah. Maybe before we move on to questions, I kind of want to test and see if the cell phone service will allow us to walk through some of the rows,
That would be
and
great.
we can check out some of the vines. You can sort of tell, like, height wise, the difference between the rows where it was mowed and then like here it's just completely in the rows, grown up. So it's sort of like waist high there. And we're gonna sort of be approaching some vines here in a second. This is all just poison oak, which we have to work around. So if you ever come here, don't touch this stuff. But here's sort of the stage of where the vines are at now. We are using like a renewal cordon system, I guess you'd call it. It's sort of like cane pruning. In a cane pruning, you'd take last year's wood and bring it up and over this wire in an arc, but we're just pulling them flat. And then next year, this guy right here will end up looking like this, and get a year from now, this one here specifically will be bent down and be doing the job that this thing is doing now. Basically what I've been doing recently is just tractor work. You can see now that we're in the area where there are some vines, I've come in with an implement, and it basically just comes in and drags a knife about 2 inches underneath the surface of the soil. It doesn't till anything. We don't want to disturb the basic structure of the soil, because there's all sorts of fungal mycorrhiza and lovely little bacteria and animals and stuff that we don't want to upset. But we do need to control the weeds or grass or plants or whatever. I hate using the word weed. Underneath the vine, otherwise it'll just grow up into the clusters. And then as far as handwork or like field work, which is mostly Cara's responsibility right now, what she has been doing, we finished pruning, we finished tying the vines, and now for the most part the Syrah is spaced out pretty evenly, but Cara is coming in with a sickle. She's not actually using her hands, but we use like a small Japanese sickle, and she just comes in and does the last little bit, taking whatever weeds the tractor didn't get, and then she'll come in and decide. So this is like Riesling down here, so she's pulling that out because this Syrah vine is happy. And then in here, this is a little bit crowded, so she may choose to take 1 or 2 of those out. For the most part, the Syrah tends to grow very sort of spaced out and behaves itself well and doesn't require too much management. Yeah, here's an example.
Need a lot of clipper work. There's all these little Riesling shoots all at the bottom.
So this is technically usable. Like if lightning struck this vine, or whatever, and we were to just saw this off right here and let this shoot grow, there's actually some future fruit on here too, so this would be white grapes here, and let this grow and tied it to the wire, in 2 or 3 years we would be not only getting fruit, but importantly it would be fruit from 40-year-old roots. So it's not like you're starting with a new vineyard and baby vines. You have a ton of drought tolerance, and you have all that complexity that you get from old vines, which you could never do unless, and like I said, unless the vines were own rooted.
Can I interject? Is that very common when things are grafted over for whatever the rootstock is to continue sending up shoots of the original grape that was, that represented the rootstock, or is that sort of novel?
It is very common, just switching you around. It's very common for a vine to express itself with how much energy it has. And if we don't do a good enough job giving it enough outlets, if we misjudge how much energy it has, either too much or too little, then it'll tell us, oh, hey, you know, I can do more. I can do more, or hey, whoa, I can't handle that load this year. You need to give me a break. And so there's multiple passes through the vineyard each year where we're basically walking up to the vine and saying, hey, how are you doing? What do you need? And listening to what they're basically saying and responding.
And here's one that's really vigorous.
Flipped again. So here's a happy vine. And I mean, a vine like this will give somewhere in the realm of 18 to 22 pounds of fruit. I mean, you can fill a box on a healthy vine like this.
And there's really no suckering to do here. It's all pretty happy with everything that's coming up from the top, the number of positions that we gave it. So this is ideally what they would all look like, but
yeah, and in terms of like thinning out and stuff, it's important to have a general rule of thumb is to have enough space between each shoot to put your hands between. And that just makes sure that, you know, this is going to be a cluster, this is going to be a cluster, 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 cluster. And if you have too much going on in one zone, then the airflow stops, the insects increase, the powdery mildew comes in, and you have sad harvest days. So I guess, you know, one of the things that, one of the things that Cara and I sort of naively talk about, and people laugh at us because it's so cliche, is the idea of the wines being made in the vineyard. I can't even say it with a straight face. But what we really mean when we're saying that to people, besides like the obvious no duh part of that, is that we're making decisions now. When Cara is pulling shoots, she's shaping the cuvee. We're thinking about this vineyard in the context of cellar space and how many barrels it's going to produce and what sort of year the vines want to have. I mean, we're completely dry farming everything at Renaissance. So we have to listen to the season and adjust and be nimble. But when we prune, when we tie, when we thin, we're building the cuvee. And so at harvest time is not really when we make the wine. Harvest time is like when you pick the fruit and stomp it and crack a beer and have fun with all your friends and make wonderful meals. It's actually, I mean, it's hard work, but it's super fun. This is the strategic time of year. It's from January until May when the cuvee is actually made.
This is where I feel the most stress, actually. Like harvest is like, okay, we're done.
So let's walk up the quad break. The self-service seems to be behaving itself really well. So we were walking along a row, which was going north-south, but we're now walking basically due west up the hill. And in a couple of rows, so here you can see the tractor work hasn't been done yet. I haven't gotten to this. And you can already tell that's what happens when you don't have the tractor pass. I'm supposed to get out here tomorrow. But if nothing happens, this will be all up through the vine. Our ability to spray is not really inhibited by where they are in terms of, like I sprayed sulfur, which is the only thing we spray, elemental sulfur. It's OMRI listed and organic. I sprayed sulfur yesterday here, and as you can see, you can see, I don't know how well the video quality is, but there's little white flecks of residual sulfur on here on the leaves. But none of this stuff, even this is all vetch, none of this stuff is actually impacting the spray's ability to hit the leaves. If I don't do anything about it, in another month, it will. You won't even be able to see this part of the vine. And this vetch is like a creeper. It crawls. It's really long and stringy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's an issue if you don't take care of it. But that's what I was saying earlier in the call is we're sort of on top of it here. I feel like, really pleased with where we're at. Obviously, it could always be better, but so no, not concerned right now.
Great.
So we're basically walking due north. This is sort of panning around. This is the entire Syrah slope, and it goes all the way down and over there. And as you come out and look towards the west, you can see it just sort of drops off again, and it's another very steep slope.
What is planted on the western side?
Let's say again.
What is that is planted on the western side?
It used to all be Cabernet Sauvignon. It's since been ripped out. Renaissance was originally planted to 360 some odd acres. They were processing like 7 tons per day. And at one point, I think it was the largest vineyard in California. It was pretty crazy. But it takes a lot of infrastructure and a lot of money to process that much wine. And they were, building these wines to last. They're excellent to drink within 20, 25 years easily. So that tends to really back up in the cellar, and they realized reduce everything, reduce down to about 30 acres. And we expanded on that a little bit since we got here, reclaiming some from the jungle, literally, with machetes and stuff. But yeah, now it's down to about 30 acres of land, and that's very confusing for people when they hear that, because like how are Aaron and Cara out farming 30 acres? That's insane and impossible. We don't have a team of people. There's no employees. The thing is, as you can see, the vines are really spaced out, and because everything is sort of 40 years old and own-rooted, and for a number of years before we got here, things weren't taken care of very well, there's all sorts of dead space. So you'll have an old, beautiful vine, an old, beautiful vine, and then space, 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 space. Here's some Riesling that we're bringing back. Space, 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 dead, dead, another vine. So the idea of, oh wow, 30 acres, on the one hand, I still have to drive the tractor. We still have to walk around a 30-acre landmass, so that is taxing, but it's truly only
10,000 vines over 30 acres.
I mean, I've seen like vineyards in France where they're planted at 5,000 vines per acre. So we could just be at Burgundy vine spacing and working 1 hectare. So it's not totally impossible for us to manage this for most parts of the year. Obviously, picking is not possible. We need a crew for that.
I have a question about the tractor work.
Say again?
I have a question just quickly about the tractor work.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the name of that knife implement that you were sort of describing? And also, do you only make one pass down each row from one side to get both, or do you make a pass on both sides of the same row?
So the name of the tool that we use is called a Clemens weed knife, Clemens, Clemens. Mm-hmm. It's a German company. All of the parts on it are like weird sizes and metric nuts you can't find anywhere. It's very light. It's not impactful. We're not talking about plowing or churning up the soil. And importantly, from an ecological standpoint, we're not talking about a ton of carbon exchange or aeration of the soil. But because we're sort of like no-till Fukuoka as much as we can possibly be. The Clemens weed knife is not Fukuoka. It's certainly not do nothing. It's doing something. But we make compromises between needing to have clean fruit to work with and especially when you're working naturally, you can't bring anything but perfect fruit in. Otherwise, it has to be sulfided at crush, period. So we make the compromise on the Clemens weed knife. To answer your other question about passes, as you can see, so here's an example of a vineyard that has the ability for me to drive one side and then come back and drive the other. And I haven't made the pass here in this vineyard yet, but you can see I have that option. That's because there's no, when they terraced these vineyards, this particular part of the vineyard was shallow enough that they could do that. In most of the Syrah vineyard where we started talking on the other side, there's actually breaks that we were walking up them at one point, and those breaks are so steep that I wouldn't be able to drive the tractor at that angle without killing myself.
And they're full of boulders.
And they're full of rocks, and if I dragged the knife right through there, as Cara was saying, it would just pick up all the rocks into the rows, and then we would have a whole other chore on our hands. We're basically looking due west now, and let's see if I can look at this. Nope. All right. If you look down here, you'll see some spirals in the distance, and this general area right here is what's called slope 1, the first slope they planted, and that is all own-rooted Cabernet Sauvignon. The Indigo that we make has all cab from there. And last year we started doing a pass and making a couple barrels of, we pick it at like 18.5 bricks and direct press it, and we're gonna make a bubbles project. So that's been in barrel for 9 months now, and we'll bottle that right before harvest and let it rest on in bottle for a year, and then figure out, you know, the whole disgorging process. It's interesting. But so let's see. So this is slope 1 here, way off in the distance at the top of this hill, right below where my finger is slope 23. And slope 1 is about halfway between us and slope 23 to give you a distance of scale. And slope 23 on the top is planted Roussanne, and then Semillon, and then Sauvignon Blanc, and the Pearl Thief comes from there. So the nice thing about all of these hills is that none of them are facing west. If you notice, slope 23 is facing us, although it's not quite true east facing, at least it's not west. And same with slope 1. If you notice, slope 1, it's probably hard to see on the video, but it wraps around, so it starts true east, and by the time you get to the end of each row, you're facing true west. So the quality of the fruit is like astonishingly different. If you just walk down one row and taste a grape every 4th vine until you get to the end, the difference in the sugar levels, the tannin, because the grapes have to develop. The reason the western facing thing is such a problem is the grapes have to develop thicker skins in order to protect themselves from that direct sunlight and heat. And thicker skins mean coarser, rougher, grumpier tannins, and that's not what Frenchtown is going for. So in terms of farming, I've been talking a lot, as I tend to do.
Okay.
But I don't know, like background wise, neither one of us, you didn't have a farming background.
Not technically. I mean, it was just something that we both wanted to do, and we tried to do the whole veggie farming, farmers markets, meat production.
Don't laugh at our fence.
Don't laugh at our fence. It works. And it didn't bring us as much joy as we thought it would. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, working with annuals versus perennials is really the big shift.
Right, and that's sort of when I started learning from Gideon and just realizing that I could be working with the same plant year after year and really get to know it and get better in that sense. it just was so much more fulfilling to me. And there's the farming itself in a vineyard feels holistic. It just feels like you're actually managing an entire piece of land.
That's the beautiful thing about it, is year after year you maintain a connection and you understand the soils. And speaking of, this is what we're walking on right here is basically what everything is planted on. And it's all varying types of granite. And then you get into this stuff, which is really interesting. See if I can get some of it up. It's I haven't quite decided exactly what it is, but it's not a high pH substance like limestone or something like that, but it sort of feels like when you're rubbing your hand on limestone and you get a sort of baby powder like coating, it sort of feels like that. And the important thing about that aggregate rock or volcanic ash or whatever it happens to be in the soils is that it holds moisture really, really well, and it fractures. As I was just banging on it, it was turning to dust. But a lot of examples, you can just sort of pull sheets of it apart, almost like slate in your hands, and it holds a ton of moisture. And I think that's the reason that we're really getting away with the dry farming. Yeah, because this stuff, the rock I picked up to actually bang it with is some of the hardest substance in the world. This is like, the Stonehenge rocks or whatever. I mean, it's super cool. It's heavily magnetic. I mean, the whole mountain that we're on right now is basically just one big electromagnet because of all the granite. But I still don't really know what that other stuff is. I've had a couple people who are knowledgeable come by and I've asked them, and nobody has the same answer. So we'll get back to you on that one. As far as our background in farming and our philosophy and where we started and where we've evolved to, we both grew up in sort of non-rural urban environments. I grew up in New York City, Cara in Connecticut, and she went to school in DC. But I read a Joel Salatin book, Omnivore's Dilemma, sometime around 2006, I think, and immediately went out and bought chickens and sheep. Right, Michael Pollan. One of the chapters is about Joel Salatin, who was one of my early hero farmers. Michael Pollan, Omnivore's Dilemma. But a huge section of that was about this guy. So I ran out and bought chickens and vegetables and sheep, which was a huge mistake because I didn't know what I was doing. And sort of learned very quickly that my 1 acre wasn't going to cut it. So that's when I originally moved out to California, was just to somehow start a farm, not really sure how I was going to do it. And a year and a half later, met Cara and convinced her to come out and try it with me. She has a background in very normal jobs, project management and all of that in the education world.
Which is very useful for farming.
Indeed. But we've been influenced a lot by the writings of Masanobu Fukuoka, who everyone's heard of. Sort of The One Straw Revolution is a very inspirational book, but he did write some other more application-based practical books of like how to do it that have shaped how we think. We've very intensely studied Rudolf Steiner and biodynamics and practiced that, stirring everything. And
that was probably the best veggie garden market. It was a market garden. It was for the farmer's market. But there was one year where I just went whole hog biodynamics, did everything, and it was amazing. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of attention to detail. But that was the one year that I thought, okay, there's something to this.
Yeah, I mean, you can just like buy the products and stir the stuff and spray it, or you can like really get into almost the spiritual side of it and go down a rabbit hole with biodynamics. And I think a lot of people are just sort of doing the application, but I don't think it really matters. I think the key to any type of farming along those lines is what Cara was talking about, just attention to detail and being there with your plants, being there on your farm and observing. And I think that the people who tend to practice biodynamics are those kinds of people, so they tend to have amazing results. I don't think it nonce. We do have crazy beliefs about the stars and all of that. So so more power to anyone who's practicing it. But we're not full on biodynamics. We've sort of shifted to our own tune of everything.
Well, I kind of just wanted to touch on I guess this idea of possibly, I think particularly where we're located in the Northeast, there's a lot of different types of agriculture happening, kind of, I would say, in the same way as out where you are, aside from the fact that there's kind of a definitely a lack of grape growing in this part of the country. But I think a lot of people kind of relate to they relate to agricultural products in kind of the context of like a whole community often. And I don't know, I guess I just my question would be is like, is there a way that your wines like sort of fit into any sort of like bartering economy or any sort of local food chain or anything like that out there? I mean, even just like,
that's a very New England idea.
Yeah. Even just like how you relate to your neighbors, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So we have a really strong community when it comes to kind of sharing and believing in things like that. But where we are, it's really hard to farm. It's just rocky mountains, and as much as we really wish we had this really great little agricultural community, it's actually just a lot of people who have gardens, and we connect with each other and support each other on that type of level. But and there are pockets where there are bigger farms, but it's actually just a lot harder to grow things like vegetables up here.
So there is like one local organic vegetable farmer, and we basically do everything barter. There's a bread baker, there's a guy who tends a herd of water buffalo that makes amazing mozzarella. And so in that sense, there's a lot of talented people up here who are doing cool things, but all of them, including us, who are actually selling their products, are not really selling them locally, because what Cara's hinting at is it's so difficult to farm here. You're basically farming on rocks. It's not like you can grow corn. And so it's so difficult to farm here that your product has to be at a certain price point in order to make it possible. And that price point doesn't work in our rural backwater part of California.
And we're just not densely populated. There just really aren't that many people out here. I mean, there's more and more, I feel like, every year, but it's a really mixed bag when it comes to the community. There's all different types of people out here.
Certainly from the standpoint of wine, it's a super mixed bag, but there's a lot of people who don't understand like even just like acidity in a wine and are super just sort of shocked, have never tasted anything like what we do. So we're a little bit on an island. That being said, Gideon's out here. We're very tight with them. We see them all the time. Donnie Rosman of La Onda is farming out here. We have a lot of friends sort of in the Sacramento area and in the Bay Area, and that's sort of how we get our kicks. But unfortunately, in terms of being integrated in our community, yes, it's tight. If anyone needs help, we're there for each other, but there's not a lot of like commerce exchange.
Yeah, and all the like little tiny fruit or vegetable stands that you tend to see all over New England, those are really concentrated in the valley here. In California, the way that we think about communities, I think, tends to be just like a bigger geographical area. Like we consider places that are almost an hour away, 2 hours away,
That's
like
close.
part of our community.
Right. So basically, where we're sitting in the shade now, we are basically at the top of the hill and near the property line that separates where we live from Renaissance. Renaissance is 1,300 acres, as I said. It was purchased in the 70s from the folks who lived next door. And that was originally like almost 8,000 acres or something. It's now 6,000 acres. And we live on that 6,000 acre cattle ranch next door, which I think is something like, most of lower Manhattan. It's like 14th Street and down in Manhattan. It's a lot of area. And it's basically just us and one other family that lives there and a lot of cows. And because the cows can't really graze on the steep part of the mountain, which they only have like a certain part of their property is on the mountain, and then there's a ton of beautiful pasture that's flat-ish. And so the mountain is sort of useless to them, and we covet it because it's perfect for vines. So it works out that that we're able to plant here. We have a great relationship and partnership with landowners, and feel comfortable that Cara and I will get to live here forever. So so we're right at that gate, and it's a weird situation because there's a whole community over here doesn't go over there, and then everybody over there can't hire the only Renaissance members who are allowed here, and we have like a special pass in our car. It's crazy. But this gate allows us to basically skip all that process or going on woods, and it's, if you walk, it's like a 15-minute walk down the mountain to our house. And it's a 300-foot elevation. We're at 2,300 feet here. And the top of this 7-acre block is at 2,300 feet. The bottom of the 7-acre block is at 2,100 feet. So it's a 200-foot drop just in this vineyard. And then our house is situated is right around the 2,100-foot elevation. So east, south, and as we're wrapping around this hill on the other side of, you can see all the wood we cleared from this vineyard. On the other side of that hill there is where we're heading to, where we live. So back in the buggy. Here's a really good example before we get in of what I was talking about. It's not exactly clay, it's not exactly rock, and you can pull it off in sheets. And some of it's blue, some of it rusts out due to oxidation and turns red, but I have no clue what it is. It's not serpentine, it's not normal granite, it's just sort of like volcanic ash or something that got compressed. It may be cooled at a different rate, too hot or too slow to become granite. It would have been granite, but it just wasn't the right set of circumstances. So it's a whole mixture of that. We have the granite boulder. Sheep are munching away and or napping. I love this guy. Hello. Grapple hook, chipper, box scraper, forklifts. This is the Clemens weed knife. So this blade here swings out, and it's actually comes out this way to be underneath the vine. And then this sensor, whenever this sensor gets actuated by hitting the trunk of a vine, it tucks the blade away so it doesn't damage the vine. And it's all controlled by this massive hydraulic hoses, which gets hooked up to the tractor, our mower. This water storage tank is basically just used as a counterbalance so that when I need to lift really heavy things, I don't tip over. Our sprayer, it's an air blast sprayer, so the big tank holds all the water and whatever you want to spray in there, compost tea or sulfur. And then this fan spins, and it's actually pushing the air into this metal plate. And then these sprayer nozzles, which you can direct whatever direction you want to go, there's multiple ones, shoot the spray out, and the fan blasts the spray into the vines. This bulldozer is just yard art. It's been sitting here for 2 years. I've never seen it run. And you'll have to forgive our redneck front yard. I'm in the middle of various construction projects. And so this is our house and our little press area. We've been pressing the wine over there. However, the reason that the crap is all over the place is because we're building a new press area under here. Still have to put the roofing in, but you know, one step at a time. Excuse the garbage again. The UPS guy has not come and picked up our packages yet. This is home.
Teeny tiny little cellar.
So we ferment everything and age everything in basically 450 square feet. And that can get really interesting, especially like because we're holding the Indigo in barrel for 3 years now, and the 19 Hearts is in barrel for 2 years now. So it's multiple vintages of 1,000 case production per year. So harvest time, there's like basically no room in here, literally whatsoever. But then it ebbs and flows, and sometimes we have a little bit of space. But the constraints actually cause us to be creative and think hard about everything we do. Yeah, no, it's a 2-car garage, basically.
It's oversized, so we got lucky there.
Yeah. Basically convinced our landlord to let us rip the garage door off. And yeah. I put myself through college building houses, working as a carpenter's assistant in New England, in New Hampshire, actually. So we do everything ourselves, framed the walls, built some insulated doors. We rented like an attic insulation blower and bought a whole bunch of eco-friendly recycled newspaper and put R60 in the ceiling. And then we set up this thing called the CoolBot, which is just an AC that gets tricked into thinking that the room is actually warmer than it really is with a little heater. So the AC thinks that it's 70 degrees when it's really 64, and you trick your AC into bringing it down lower than the factory setting. So even during harvest time here, we keep the cellar really, really cold, sometimes like 58, but never above 60. And there's a little bit of seasonal fluctuation, but for the most part, it's 60 degrees all year round.
And we think this is gonna last us for just the next couple of years. This is not the permanent Frenchtown cellar. This is the interim Frenchtown cellar. We have a site picked out for the permanent location, but going to take some time to get that project off the ground.
One step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of cellar work, it really couldn't be more simple.
Yeah.
And that's not because we have humble space. It's actually because we learned such a simple process from Gideon, we're able to do what we do in such a humble space. And there's really nothing to it. The fruit is picked very early in the morning. It comes in super cold because we leave the vineyard before 10 o'clock most days. Don't pick any fruit while it's hot out because the sugar levels really rise and the acid levels plummet. So it comes into the winery cool. We usually take a break because we've had a full morning of picking and chill out for an hour, and then the fruit gets stomped, whole cluster. Especially with regards to the Syrah, everything is 100% whole cluster, and we'll always make it that way. We have started experimenting with hand destemming for some other cuvées, but the 19 Hearts needs the stems, in our opinion. And so, yeah, I mean, it goes out to the press, it comes back into barrel, and there's no fancy equipment. It's all, I mean, we have a pump, but we never pump wine. The pump is only used during harvest. Our pump is on for 6 weeks out of the year and only used for juice or active must. It's once fermentation's finished and we have a wine, everything's gravity from there.
What kind of press are you guys using?
Well, we have been using a hydraulic vertical basket press, which we adore.
Adore is a strong word.
I adore it. Come to find out, it's fantastic for pressing macerated red grapes or macerated grapes.
Yeah.
If you have done a couple plunge downs and it's been macerating in the presence of ethanol for a couple days, the skins really break down. And the vertical basket press allows you to reach a couple bars of pressure and get nearly the same volume of liquid as a membrane press would, but you don't ever get that pressed juice taste. The press that we use has these built-in cycles, and as soon as it feels a little bit of resistance from the grapes, it changes its speed and its pressure application and builds up over time. And so everything tastes great until the last drop. There is no like pressed juice versus free run concern.
But it's really hard to make things like the Peraltif and the Sicilia with that press. It's a lot of extra work. It actually takes the most work to make the Sicilia, which is our rosé.
Yeah.
It's super finicky, and we have to be really, really careful and put somebody in the press and kind of pre-stomp the grapes. And so yeah, we're in the market for
We're thinking
a
about
new piece of equipment at this weird time of the world.
We're thinking about getting an old 1970s era Wilmus flatter press, which does an amazing job. People don't like them because they can be dangerous. It's definitely not like something for an intern to do because it can like suck you in and spit you out.
But it's what we used at Gideon's, so we're already familiar with the press itself.
And we would just use that for white and rosé. And things like the Cabernet Bubbles project, like to be able to whole cluster press Cabernet and make a Blanc de Noir.
Right.
We would never
you need
basket press.
You need a pretty specific press to make that work.
Right.
And we want to make that work. So we'll keep them both and use them both in different applications.
Cool. Awesome. So since we're going to try to be a little more like farming focused in these segments, maybe let's talk about your nursery work and your new vineyards and sort of your ideas about sort of establishing vineyards, both sort of intellectually in terms of site selection and fruit selection or plant material selection, and then also just like how do you go about turning a field into a vineyard?
Takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
We can start with site selection because that's really the most natural point of where we started our project, because we were already farming at Renaissance. We already kind of had an idea that this mountain in particular had some pretty amazing terroir. So as for us personally, just kind of talking to the neighbors next door and building a relationship with them and getting to explore more aspects of this mountain, we discovered three spots on the southern and eastern side of the mountain that have water, which is pretty incredible. The eastern facing aspect that Aaron was talking about before is there, and then there's also this really great protection because there are all these existing forests surrounding these mini areas that are almost like slightly cleared and looking like they just want vines to be planted on them anyway. So definitely orientation to the sun. The soil isn't something that we specifically chose. It's more for our particular case. It's because we were already farming at Renaissance and we're already farming on this one mountain. It's just a continuation of the same types of soil. Maybe a little bit more of that volcanic ash that Aaron was talking about on top of the mountain. Yeah, so once we kind of mapped out these spots that had a slope, an accessible slope, it can't be so steep that you can't actually get the tractor on it. The next step, is to clear, and that is really, really interesting. I mean, if you're going in with $1 million, it's one thing, but
and it's more that it's not just about infinite money. It's that if you have infinite money and infinite resources to clear a slope, then you start just like making decisions that rent the bulldozer and knock the trees over and make the ground smooth and
destroy it first.
So it's like, I mean,
like
they're basically right. You're ripping up the mountainside and then rebuilding it. What we sort of do is, the dogs are barking because the UPS guy is here, and our pit bull's in love with the UPS guy. So it's so in terms of site selection, which Cara was talking about, a lot of it for me was just bringing Gideon over and showing him all of the options that we had, and him going, oh, right there is good and right there is good, and
we're really lucky to have that resource.
For sure. But we're not so much clearing the land as we are like dismantling it, just pulling the trees apart, literally cutting the root systems out. And then in terms of, we're not trying to terraform. I mean, we're slightly de-rocking so that it's possible to mow and stuff like that, or swing a sickle and not hit a rock. But for the most part, our goal is to leave the ground undisturbed and to leave the fungal network, the root systems, and the natural way that rock built up in place. Especially when you look at like the combination of the hard granite and whatever that compressed volcanic ash or whatever it is, everything, it was all part of a volcanic event, and then certain things became granite and certain things became this or that, or had certain amounts of this element or mineral than the other, all based on the rate in which they cooled. So depending on how fast that lava cooled determines what type of granite or what type of volcanic residual rock it became. And when you start plowing, so the way that settles on the mountain, you can imagine this eruption and all the stuff's flowing, and eventually it stops becoming mountains and you end up in a valley, and the lava sort of hits the water or whatever and cools and stops. But during that process, everything is falling out of that solution and forming in a density sorting application. So the heavy stuff like the gold that they came to California and searched for, that stuff sinks right to the bottom, which is why you have to mine it. And then all the fluffy stuff is at the top. And that's the order in which it should be, and that's the order in which plants have evolved to extend their tap roots that do different things. Some roots take in nutrients, some roots are looking for water. When you turn all that up, then the natural density sorting that time and geological events have created all gets disrupted. And that volcanic ash that I can pick up and break up with my hand, well, maybe that was 2 or 3 meters below ground at one point, and it was doing a great job holding stores of water. But now, because of multiple years of tilling or even just vineyard clearing and development, you've churned it up to the surface, and now it's powder instead of a rock, and now it's not serving that function. And then you get all sorts of problems.
Sure.
So that's sort of the philosophy, is make it so that I don't die while driving the tractor, but other than that, do as little as possible.
Just in terms of sort of these various igneous and volcanic rocks we're working with here, do you find any, one of the things that I've noticed a lot in sloped vineyard sites and just slopes anywhere, you get a lot of alluvial movement of softer material down the slopes. So you end up with like a hard cap on the very top of the hill, and then you have more soft stuff, but less on the sides. Then you get to the bottom and you kind of have like a little like pocket of that. Are you finding that sort of stuff where you have these like softer, wetter materials kind of pooling at the bottom?
Yes, and it's hard to see if there's been no disturbance. What you'll typically see, because of that density sorting, is that if you just wander out to a completely unfarmed, undisturbed hillside, it's very difficult to see what you're talking about. But our road to get out to the Renaissance property had to be bulldozed back in the 70s. And when they did that, they were bulldozing a drivable road on a very steep slope. So you have on one side multiple layers of geology to look at, on the other side a steep drop that you don't want to drive your car over. So it becomes way more apparent on something like a road where you can see that disturbed geology to see the settling effect. That's why I'm not a geologist, but I'm sure of what I'm talking about, because you can see everything going from really rich organic matter. I mean, there's parts of the vineyard where you almost could grow vegetables, and then 18 inches in, it starts to get more like oxidized, iron oxidized granite and crumbly stuff, and then you get boulders, and then you get this ashy stuff.
And you'll see in the video that we took on the way down from the Gamay that the location of that vineyard is sort of smack dab in the middle of this mountain. It's not all the way at the bottom. It's not right where the Syrah is all the way at the top. So it has that sort of like sweet spot going on, especially with the forest right next to it. It's just extra protection.
How long?
A forest is like, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask how long ago you planted the Gamay.
Last spring,
and that was sort of just like our first round. We're aiming to just keep building on it this year. Like, we don't have a huge giant crew of 15 people. I would love that to just get it done. So we're just chipping away at getting those vines in the ground. We're
not drilling holes with an auger. It's not like when you plant a vine, you're just out there with like this little pitchfork, and you go in 9 inches and you just put the vine in, and that's it. We're not like prepping the land. It's our whole nursery situation and the way we propagate vines and stuff. It's really, really low tech and old school, and you don't need much. I mean, if you just go out into a vineyard and cut a cane and stick it in a glass of water and put it on your windowsill, it will shoot roots out. And then if you stick that in the soil, you will have a vine. So our nursery is just a bunch of sticks in the ground. And then you wait 6 months, and that's it. I mean, when we were in the Jura in December, we grabbed a whole bunch of Sauvignon cuts. Yeah, it's illegal. It's illegal to do that, but suitcase Sauvignon, and just cut them up into little chunks and planted them, and they're doing great. So the nursery is low tech. The farming it's not like we have like a greenhouse with hydroponics and timers and all of that. I took a video of it on the way down, but it's basically just a bunch of potting containers in our front yard with 2,000 gamay vines.
I feel like I interrupted you, maybe saying something about the forest, but if you want me to.
Oh, just that they act as air conditioners.
Yeah.
That the trees bring rain. It's there's a book by Fukuoka called Sowing Seeds in the Desert, and he talks extensively about the very counterintuitive concept. It's not how people normally think of it, but trees attract rain and they create blocks of cool air. And if you can create a block of cool air at the top of the mountain above your vineyard, then hot air rises and cool air falls. And so what you get is these huge blocks of cool air that are rolling down the hillside and through your vines. And that it's sort of, in a way, in order for us to create or promote a cool microclimate, we almost need 100 acres in order to have 10 cool acres.
Yeah.
You need 100 acres of forest with like a 10-acre clearing. If you just create a wine region in North Yuba, right? If it became super famous and this was the new Napa and everyone just cut down all the trees like we did and there were vineyards everywhere in North Yuba, in 15 years, it wouldn't be North Yuba anymore. It would be several degrees hotter. People would be talking about, oh, I guess you can't plant this anymore. We'll have to rip it out and plant that. And because the non-developedness of it is what gives us our cool microclimate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is like an old thing that viticulturists have known forever. And you go to Burgundy, and that's why there's forests on top of the hills. You know, like this is a thing people have done for a long time.
Well, and think about the difference in price between Chablis and Petit Chablis, right? Where does Petit Chablis come from? It's from the very top of the hill,
Yeah.
right? And no knock on Petit Chablis. I'm just saying, like, that it's all rock. There's no soil there.
Mm-hmm.
Gravity, right? It's all the hard stuff that the wind and the water can't erode is what's at the top.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was asking you about with the way the slope and erosion is changing the various parts of your mountain here. It's the same thing, you know. At the very top, it's just really hard rock. It's all that survives up there.
Yep.
So,
but it's sort of human pride.
Yeah.
To want to be at the top of the mountain, right? Like, right? Like, there's a point in the video as we're driving down that I shot where we open the gate and we're driving through the forest on this little road with tall trees on either side. And I was actually thinking to myself as I was shooting the video, oh, it's a shame all these trees are in the way, because if they weren't there, you literally have a 360-degree view. You could look in 150 miles in all directions. But that's,
we need the trees.
Yeah, but
Let's leave them there.
But that's if you have infinite money. If you're just like, oh, let's buy a $10,000 pump and drill more wells and pump water up there and cut down all the trees and bring in, right? That's what you do. And so just like the constraint of a 450 square foot cellar causes us to be very creative, you know, the constraints of having no money and is exciting and fun, and you know, it's what life's all about. It makes
Amen.
So the new plantings you folks are doing, you have this Savagnin that we won't talk about, and
right.
You have this Gamay, and is that sort of where you folks are at right now, or what else are you playing with in these home vineyard sites?
Gamay was an obvious choice from the get-go based on the soils. If you go to Côte-de-Pie or most parts of Fleury and take a photo of the soil and then come here and take a photo of the soil, there's almost nobody who could tell you the difference. It's granite with lots of quartz in it on red clay, and the hillside structure is very similar. And I think that the reason that they shift to Gamay instead of Pinot in large part is because of the change from limestone to granite.
Mm-hmm.
It's less about the climate than it is about the change in geology and how those two varietals react. And obviously, to be fair, and with all due respect to what Gideon's doing, Pinot can clearly be done on granite. But there's a reason that you don't drink Closerone young. And it's not just because of how Gideon makes his wines. It's because the electric nature of granite and what that does to a very delicate varietal like Pinot, it means that it takes a while for it to become Pinot-like. It doesn't show Pinot until it has age, and that's why I hold Closerone bottles until they're ready. But I know for a fact that Gideon would agree with that. So yeah, that's the choice with Gamay for us. Is we're into a very fresh style, drinking the wines a little bit younger, looking for an elegant expression in California, and we're hoping that Gamay is the right choice.
And then we'll probably in the other sites do sort of like a replication of what we have at Renaissance, in addition to a little bit of Marsanne.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll keep the Roussanne Sauvignon Blanc going, and then we'll add some Marsanne. Maybe plant more Syrah just because we love it. But I think for our home site, we're really just going to focus on the Gamay, and we'll have access to Renaissance for years to come. So anything that is fun and interesting to us is really what we're focused on.
I'm jealous of people who make like 2 wines.
Yeah.
I want to make like
Yeah.
a North Yuba white, a North Yuba rosé, and a North Yuba red, and not list varietals, and that's that, and just express terroir and call it good. Like,
Do that.
Yeah. Like, 300 years from now, someone can do that. You gotta spend all the time like tinkering with stuff until that can be a thing.
right, exactly.
Yeah, it's a multi-generational educational project. So
Definitely.
Yep. No, I mean, a lot of what we're doing is not for the end result. You really have to enjoy the process.
Right.
You can't be end goal oriented with what we're doing. I'll be 40 in a couple of years, and by the time these vines are 20 years old, I'll be looking to, I won't be able to be as active in the vineyard, and that's just not the point. It doesn't matter. I love being out there. I get to spend almost every day hanging out with Cara and the dogs, with the sun on our backs, and that's the point. And who knows? I mean, we don't have kids now. If we do have kids, are they going to want to be in the middle of nowhere making wine?
Yeah.
I would never do anything for that reason. It's just, we're just doing it because we love it. Just fun.